Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I'm your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, and joining me today to break down the Detroit Tigers series coming up and his general thoughts overall on these young Rockies. It's the voice of the Colorado Rockies on the TV side, Mr. Drew Goodman. What's going on, buddy?
Not too much. Just this is a long trip. We were just chatting off air that we've had great weather in every city we've been in, not only on this trip, but going back to the last trip, Washington, low humidity, beautiful days. New York was beautiful. And then Atlanta, really low humidity, beautiful days. Milwaukee, and now here in Detroit. It's we've been fortunate, knock on wood.
Yeah, and then you basically, once you get back home, you got a short little trip in LA, and then it's a bunch more home dates in Colorado, which should be fun with those Dodgers coming to town and maybe 50-50 on the line for Shohei Ohtani. How about that?
Really remarkable. I think he may eclipse it the way he's going prior to the Rockies playing them, or at least at Coors Field. Obviously the Rockies, as you mentioned, will be out there next weekend, the following weekend. But one of the things I like about the schedule, yes, you wish obviously the Rockies were involved in a postseason push. We know that's not the case, but they're playing all good teams. They're playing all teams that are either playoff bound or aspire still to be playoff bound, including this series against the Detroit Tigers.
Yeah, and this is probably, I think it's the seventh time that the Rockies have played in Detroit. First time was in 2003. I think you were probably there for that. How much has Detroit, just as a city, I know this is not necessarily baseball, but I find it to be interesting. How much has Detroit changed over the past 2 decades?
It's been remarkable. It has been nothing short of remarkable, at least in the central downtown area. And I've done a lot of reading on this in the last couple of days because we were here a couple of years ago, and it was eye-opening, the transformation that's taken place. It was sad when you came here even 10 years ago. There were so many buildings that were just abandoned and not even boarded up. Sometimes a building, we know it's abandoned, and they usually put plywood at least in where there was windows. That wasn't even the case here. And I'm talking about not small buildings. I'm talking about high rises, just abandoned. Their train station, which is, historical in that, was built, I think 100 years ago. And then they moved the train station, where the main train station was. But this was a large, massive, historic building with an office tower on top. And it had been abandoned for years. Somebody bought it, started refurbishing it in 2018, and just a few months ago, it opened up as I think maybe GM put part of their headquarters there. I forget exactly, but that building's transformed. When you used to drive by it, it was eerie. There were so many places that when you looked, it was really eerie. And I'm not an alarmist, but it wasn't the safest city in America. And now in the downtown area, I mean, a couple of years ago, the same thing. Yesterday and today, running around and jogging and then just walking. It's really been regentrified, and it's great to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the entire town, like you said, the city is on the come up. The team is on the come up. 2 games above 500. They're still trying to make a push for that final wild card. That very well could happen.
And, yeah, we got in Sunday night, and still fairly early in that. The Lions downtown at Ford Field were playing their opener. The Lions, as we know, are really, really good. So the town was abuzz with that, and downtown area was rocking.
All right, let's talk Rockies. Actually, I want to talk about the Drew Goodman podcast first. 2-parter going on last Thursday, coming up in a couple of days. I'm a fan of the show. I'll mark out for it. But great conversation with Matt Holliday. That's been awesome. And I think just going back now that it's been a week or so, that is just an all-time moment. Just Jackson throwing the ball out to Matt. And that's one of the nice things I think about your conversation with Matt is it wasn't on the weekend. It was, a little bit after that. So he had time for it to really kind of settle in. And that's just when you think about all-time wonderful moments at Coors Field and for the organization as a whole. I mean, that first pitch and just Jackson coming back to Baltimore, to a place where he grew up. That was his playground. For him to be back as an adult is just an all-time moment.
I thought it was a fabulous moment. I think baseball spawns more of those moments than the other major sports. Not to say that we haven't seen the kin of former players, former greats make it in the NHL, the NFL, the NBA. It does happen. I mean, a big offseason story, of course, was LeBron James and his son Bronny, and now they're together on the Lakers, and I'm sure that will hopefully have some moments. But in this case, Matt Holliday's an all-time great Rocky. Ultimately, the Rockies and Matt couldn't come to a contract agreement. The Rockies did the right thing at the time. Rather than let him just walk, they traded him. And we know who they got back in return, most notably, but not exclusively, Carlos Gonzalez, because they also got their closer for a few years, including their closer in 2009, Houston Street. So that cannot be dismissed. That turned out to be a really good trade, and it certainly eased the angst of the fans and the disappointment of the fans when Matt Holliday, who was a hero here, was moved on. But people follow teams closely, especially when they're doing well. And we know that 07 team is to this day the most special Rockies team. Patrick, you've talked a lot about it on your podcast. And so, to have Matt come back and his son not just be, hey, the guy made the big leagues, which is ridiculously hard, but he's the number one prospect in baseball. And, it's such a likable family, a lovely family. And then you add in the fact that Ethan's there, and Ethan potentially could go number one next year. And we know the Rockies are going to have a very high pick next year. You start going down that road. So, yeah, it was a fun weekend, especially for those of us like yourself that have known Matt for a long time. It was a great weekend.
I did get a chance to talk with Ethan briefly in the dugout, and there's a couple of people saying, "How old is this kid?" Because he's a big kid, right? He's tall and well built, and he was impressed by Coors Field. Man, this is a beautiful ballpark. You got to throw out the stat, hey, third oldest stadium in the National League, and eyes popping out. So I that was my recruiting pitch to him, just in case if the cards happen to fall that way in the draft next year, we'll see.
Yeah, well, Matt and I talk about Ethan, I think in part 2, which will come out in a couple of days, and he talks about Ethan, and he talks about the possibility that he becomes a Rocky, and so that hasn't been lost upon him at all. It's something that he has thought about, and he'll expound upon that, in that conversation coming up in part 2 this week on the podcast. But that would be something, right? There would be, some form of serendipity to that.
It would be good teaser on the podcast. See, I was going to say you talk with Matt about pickleball in part 2, but I guess
we did as well. I mean, yeah, you know how athletes are. If you're competitive, it's hard when you retire from your given sport to just put that competitive level away. For most, not all, some are able to do it, but many need a different outlet. And for Matt, that outlet has come in the form of pickleball, and he is obsessed with pickleball now. He built a pickleball court in his barn, and on the road, he solicits pickleball games. And sometimes people recognize who he is, and many times they don't, other than the fact that, man, this is a big athletic dude who's really strong.
Oh, that's hilarious. I love that. Yeah, looking forward to part 2 on Thursday. All right, Rockies in 2024. Drew, what's been the biggest surprise this season for the Rockies, and why has it been Brenton Doyle's ascension as a true all-star caliber player?
Well, I mean, you answered your own question, so it was, I guess, rhetorical. Well, I'll go 2 places. I'll say number 1, as you led me to, Brenton Doyle's vast improvement offensively. I mean, his defense, which was the best we've seen at Coors Field as a center fielder last year, has been just as good, if not better, this year, if that's possible. And offensively, you hope that he was able to raise the batting average and the on-base percentage somewhat. 30 points would have been nice. He hit 203 last year, if memory serves me accurately. And, you hope, okay, can he get to 230, below league average? Can you raise the on-base percentage, to 300, walk a little bit more? I don't think anybody saw, roughly around a 270 average, an increase on his OPS of over 200 points, which is the best in baseball, number one. And so that has been the best, I guess, biggest surprise is how you phrased it, how you framed it. And now you look at Brenton Doyle and you say, this guy has a chance to be not just a star, but, a superstar type of talent. And I always believe in let the thing evolve. He's in his second year, but just, being around him every day, seeing his work ethic, seeing his passion, seeing his drive, seeing how through all that hard work, the improvement offensively is where it is. I don't think he's going to get, one of these guys that's going to get carried away and just go, okay, I'm content. I don't think that's in his DNA. And the 1A story from a surprise would be Michael Toglia, because there were times within the organization, not just people who observe the games on a daily basis, felt like, man, it just may not happen for Michael Toglia. An intriguing guy, a lot of power, really athletic for such a large person, but there's just so much swing and miss that he just may not be an everyday big leaguer. And as I said, that was not just the sentiment of, some fans or some people who followed the team closely. There was legitimate concern within the organization. And people miss all the time. It's the first rounders. It's not, slam the gavel down and they're going to be a really good big leaguer. There's so many first rounders historically that miss. Some become good players. Some become journeyman players. Some don't make it at all. Some never arrive, as you well know, Patrick. So I would add to the Doyle conversation as surprises in 24, the ascension of Michael Toglia. He's a legit offensive threat. He leads the club in home runs, and he's played Gold Glove caliber defense at first.
And doing the Cal Ripken Jr. thing, playing every single day. I think you're dead on with 1A, 1B on that, because he has been this surprise that I had my doubts about. And then you kind of look back and you say, well, he had some extended opportunities, never was really able to put it together fully. But, he always had either CJ Cronin his way, Chris Bryant, Elehuris Montero, like all of those guys were kind of there, that it wasn't maybe the full opportunity to do that. But now getting to do that and having this opportunity and seeing his walk rate rise, right? He's adding little tools to his toolbox there, really makes it promising. Like they've got something over there at first base.
I don't know exactly what it is today, Tuesday, September 10th. I do know that much, but what the OPS the league average is, Patrick, but it's somewhere around, 713, 712, low 700s, right? We know the batting average is like 244 for the season. Big Mike is below that, though. If you go back to when he started playing every day over the last really half a season's worth of games, I think today may be game number 81 in a row for him. Don't quote me on that, but somewhere right in there. And he's hit above the league average. Yeah, the strikeouts are still there, but OPS for the season, so this includes early on when he's kind of up and down, it's above 800. And if you're above 800, so now you're basically 100 points higher than league average. But if you're above 800 in the first half of a season, again, as you well know, Patrick, you are being discussed as a potential all-star, depending on your position. But 800, man, that's high-level production. And that's where he sits. And the other guy who sits there is the aforementioned Brenton Doyle.
Yeah, that's a 1-2. That's quite a tandem. Since June 6th, when that streak started, 83 consecutive games, 19 homers, 42 RBI, hit in the middle of that Rockies lineup, 43 walks, so more walks than RBI. And you're right, 832 OPS in 83 games. So there's your half a season. That's borderline 40 home run power right there for Michael Toglia.
Yeah, and that's all-star production. And I'm not getting carried away. You know, 83 games is not 162. But I love that you pointed out, Patrick, this dude posts up every day. And I love guys that post up every day. It's why I have immense respect for Ryan McMahon. The only time he comes out is if Buddy says, hey, we're going to give you a day. He never begs out of the lineup. And I know that there's a number of times he's played this year where body doesn't feel right. He battled an illness after the All-Star break. He never says a word. He's just not wired that way. And I know there's going to be, criticism of his second half because once again, he put together a terrific first half. He was an All-Star for the first time in his career, and the second half has not been great. But like Ryan McMahon, Michael Toglia posts up every day. Brenton Doyle's the kind of guy, he needs a day here and there because he's playing center field. Those and we haven't even talked about Tovar. Tovar posts up every day. You win with those kind of guys. You really do. You win with guys who want to be out there. It's important for them to be out there. And then the next generation of guys that come up, just like we always reference Charlie Blackmon and his work ethic and the standard he sets. I think it's going to be the same when guys look at the Doyles, the Tovars, the McMahons, and now the Tolias of the world.
A lot of improvement, as you mentioned there, stepping up, having more pieces. I think another one of those pieces that's been a real pleasant surprise in the second half, really since the start of August, has been the bullpen, particularly the rookie relievers. Like, I'm just curious what your thoughts on, how legitimate some of these guys can be, because the early returns for so many of them have been really solid, from a lefty in Luis Peralta, Angel Chivilli, who's now the 8th inning guy at 22 years old, Seth Halverson throwing 100 miles an hour, and Victor Vodnik, the team's closer for a while, is now back and healthy. Those are 4 rookie guys that, have been way more great than they have been bad.
Yeah, think about this, Patrick. The area that, there's a couple areas that need improvement. We know that, right? The rotation has to be better. The Rockies are 30th in team ERA. They're 30th in starter ERA. They're also 30th in pen ERA. And I've always said, as have many, so this is not some sort of I'm not trying to take credit for this, but bullpens typically are easier to fix than other elements of your club. And we may have witnessed now a bullpen that is being fixed right in front of our eyes in the same season, that now when you look into next year, you go, okay, there's some, I can't wait to see these guys close out ball games. And I so many of them have had great starts. And we know there's going to be rough, days. That's just the nature of the sport. It's certainly the nature of pitching out of a bullpen. George Frazier, my late great friend and fellow broadcaster, would tell me all the time, because George did this for a decade in the big leagues. He said, if you get called upon 65, 70 times in a season, guess what? 12, 15 times, you're just not going to be great. That's the nature of it. But specifically now, Tyler Kinley, Tyler's a veteran. He's going to be back next year at least. The Rockies, he has another year on his deal. Big-time professional, big-time adult, as I like to say. You say that about Michael Kadire. He's an adult, not saying other guys are not. But I love Tyler Kinley. And Tyler Kinley had a very tough first half. Tyler Kinley has found his release point, especially on that slider. And he's had a terrific second half, and he's kind of anchored that 9th inning. I'm going to kind of reiterate some of the things you said. Angel Chivilli, who initially, I said this on television the other day, when he got out there early on, it looked like, okay, I just arrived from Hartford. I know I'm not supposed to be here very long. And there was not panic, but there was a feeling of maybe he was a little overwhelmed. Now, really confident, great changeup, 97, 98 with the fastball, 8th inning guy. Seth Halverson's a future ninth inning guy, right? I mean, he blows 102. He has a really good changeup as well, and a slider that can be effective. And that's leaving out Victor Vodnik, who was closing games, as you mentioned. So, Luis Peralta. Criswell, I know he gave up the back-to-back home runs in New York against three legends, but I think Criswell has a really good arm. So all in all, the Rockies potentially, and Jaden Hill just came up. Jaden Hill's blowing 98, 99. They may have given Rockies fans a lot of hope and excitement for what that bullpen is going to look like next year when they break camp, as opposed to what it was in large measure this year. So I think they're fixing that right in front of our eyes.
It's one thing to give an opportunity to these players and say, 12 rookies made their debut. It's another thing for them to go out and have this kind of success. Jake Bird, another guy that I think has gotten himself right after having some injury issues early on in the season. You can remember him getting called up in 2022 and immediately being inserted into really big, important spots and getting that trust from Buddy. So you're right. They've fixed those things. And I'm sort of curious if you think maybe they'll break the franchise record with that 13th prospect that could debut. Zach Veen's been making noise in AAA. Yanquiel Fernandez already on the 40-man roster. And maybe Carson Palmquist. I don't know. Do you think number 13, lucky number 13, is going to come this year?
I'm not positive of that. I don't know. Barring an injury, you hope that doesn't happen. I don't know where that would come. Potentially, if I'm doing my math wrong, I know Ty Block was just DFA'd, but I think Antonio Senzatella is in line to, fill that void and get him a couple of starts and give him momentum going into next spring training. So I don't know if that would take place. I think the Rockies are really big on earning your way here. And Zach Veen's dealt with a lot of injuries. And it's good to see Zach Veen doing good things in Albuquerque. But I think it's probably, A, you have to have an immediate need, and B, let him sustain that for a while. So I'm not 100% sure that we're going to see the 13th, so it may just end in a tie this year with 12 guys making their debut, as was the case in 14 and 16.
Look, Rockies fans are getting greedy out there. They're like, hey, bring up some more of these young guys. It's always been positive. Did just get news that Austin Gomber on the paternity list, so he probably won't be making that start on Wednesday. Tanner Gordon called up for the 26-man roster. Now, in this series for the Tigers, I remember talking with you about this a couple years ago. Rockies facing pitchers who eventually ended up winning the Cy Young Award that year. With Tarek Skubal going on Thursday, the Rockies very well have a chance to face both Cy Young Award winners in a 10-game span. That's pretty wild. I'm guessing they've probably never have had to deal with that before. And we could have two Triple Crown winners also for pitchers, because I know Chris Sale is in that spot. You might be able to hold on to the strikeouts with Dylan Cease. And Tarek Skubal's got the most wins, strikeouts, and best ERA in the American League as well.
Yeah, I think it's a fait accompli that both are going to win their respective Cy Youngs. It was more difficult to have this occur in a 10-day span for most of the history of baseball, certainly since 97, because it was sporadic when you played the other league. It was more kind of a June thing, and I don't think you could unequivocally tell anyone who was going to win the Cy Young in June. So, yes, this is probably a first. It's on the same road trip, no less. Not going to be a lot of fun. I hope, the other day the Rockies won a ball game with Freddie Peralta starting, who strikes everyone out. I think over the last several years, fourth best strikeout rate in all of baseball, and the Rockies had gone the first 5 games of the road trip striking out 75 times, which was the second most over a 5-game span in the history of baseball, the modern history of the game, going back to 1901. Then you face a guy like Peralta, and you're like, oh man, this is going to be bad today. The Rockies win the ball game, and they punch only 6 times. So with Skubal coming up, yeah, I mean, this is one of the elite guys in the sport. And also, not that we didn't know Skubal was good, But it also takes me to something, Patrick, when you and I are chatting down in Scottsdale next spring training, we always prognosticate based on names we know, names that roll off our tongue, as opposed to what young guys are going to be impactful beyond the young guys that everybody has rated as the number 2 prospect in the game, the number 7 prospect, right? Junior Caminero just came up with Tampa. We talked about Jackson, Holliday, and Baltimore, but who are the new names going to be that truly impact the team? Look at Kansas City and the turnaround that they've made in a year's time. So to me, that's even more fascinating than just jumping on the bandwagon of a name we know or a prospect that we've heard bandied about quite a bit over the previous, 18, 24 months.
Yeah, I think you're right. Teams like Kansas City and Detroit, you're looking and you might not know a lot of the names, but they're contributing to these postseason runs. And the Rockies have those guys where if they continue to take those steps forward, maybe they're in a similar conversation in 2025. Last one here before we get you out. Props to Quinn. Thanks for joining the show over on YouTube. John, the president of the Rocky Mountain chapter of Sabre. So hardcore Rockies fan. Thanks for joining, John. But I know you'll like this. On this day in history, in 2007, Troy Tulowitzky hit his 20th home run of the season to give him the record for National League rookie shortstops, breaking Ernie Banks' record of 19. He held it for 53 years. I couldn't help but think that, with Holliday coming back and Larry Walker now showing up at the ballpark a ton, that, maybe the next guy I know that fans would love to see, besides Andres Galarraga, who nobody sees him. So that's just a whole other thing. But Troy Tulowitzky, I mean, do you think there's going to be a time where, there's a Tulo day and maybe number 2 is up in the rafters, or again, maybe he's just back at the ballpark throwing out a first pitch and making people smile?
Hope so, and I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Stances soften over time, and I think that, let's be honest, most players, and there's nothing wrong with it, I'm not offended by ego. I think everyone who has self-confidence has some form of ego. I don't look at that as a 4-letter word. It's a 3-letter word. That's one of the reasons I don't. But you also don't mind feeling adoration and adulation once again when maybe you don't get it as much or haven't received it in a long period of time. Tulo continues to work in the game. He's on the University of Texas baseball staff, and it's not an honorary thing. Tulo's out working with young people every single day. So I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility. I think he, and I'm not choosing sides here. I'm just reporting facts. He had gotten most sideways with Jeff Bridich, and Jeff has moved on, as we know. So I think that is certainly repairable. We'll see what happens going forward, but I think the fans, most importantly, would love that. And one of the most magical times in franchise history, and you want to see these guys create more magic, new magic, if you will, another series of Rocktobers. But who can forget, the Tulo chant, especially in 2007, but through that period of time. And I think that one of the unfortunate aspects of Troy's career is, we've had this great period where we've been able to celebrate the Hall of Fame career of Larry Walker first and now of Todd Helton. Troy Tulowitzky had Hall of Fame talent. It's unusual where you can point to a guy early in his career and go, that dude has Hall of Fame ability, and if the planets align and he's afforded good health, he's going to be more than likely a Hall of Famer. Troy Tulowitzky was on that trajectory. Unfortunately, as we know, once he kind of tore that muscle in his quad, I'm pushing on my own, in his quad, upper quad flexor area, he was never the same. He dealt with it throughout his career, and he just was not the same at the plate. He wasn't quite the same defensively, and it's a shame, but that's life.
Yeah, he'll be on the Hall of Fame ballot this December, and we'll find out if maybe he can at least get 5%, which is a rarity in and of itself for some Rockies players, to then continue some kind of conversation about, well, maybe we need to change some of the standards a little bit for the Hall of Fame. That's an off-season topic, but it is interesting because we just don't have players winning 300 games anymore. We barely have players winning 200 games anymore. So I think, what's a Hall of Famer is not quite the same as it was a decade or two ago, where guys could compile. That's not to say I think Troy Tulowitzky is a Hall of Famer. It's just, what is a Hall of Famer? I think it looks a lot different than it has ever before.
In this period of time, and who knows what it'll look like 50, 75 years from now, but specific to starting pitchers, I mean, we give standing ovations if a guy leaves a ball game after 6 innings and he allowed 1 run on 3 hits, which is, it's a great 6 innings, but it's easy to go in the direction I'm going to right now and say, an era ago or a couple of eras ago with guys I watched, Seaver and Gibson and Carlton. I mean, if you told them they were going to get a standing O for going 6 innings, they said, well, what about the other 3? But the sport is different. There's nothing wrong with it because back then you didn't have a multitude of guys coming in throwing, 100 miles an hour with wicked sliders or splitters and make it virtually impossible for guys to score runs off them late in a ball game. So, with the individual wins, there's going to be a new measurement. I mean, 200 is going to be hard to come by. 200 is going to be hard to come by. So what do we see? Didn't DeGrom win a Cy Young with less than 10 wins? Am I remembering that right?
Maybe. I know.
I don't know what it is. The record wasn't necessarily overwhelming, but the other data surrounding what he did certainly was, and that's and he's not going to be the last one. Yeah, the sport evolves. The sport definitely evolves.
Yeah, 10. He won 2 Cy Young awards. In 2018, 2019, won 10 one of the years and 11 in the other. So he has 2 Cy Young awards for 21 wins. And how many guys during the 60s, 70s, 80s won 21 wins in a single season and never even sniffed, a top 3 vote. So, yeah, baseball is a wonderful game in that way. It's always changing and evolving.
Yeah, and Patrick, I was looking this morning. There's 2 guys, Luis Arraez and why am I doing a blank? In Atlanta, there's 2 guys hitting 300 right now in the National League. Yeah, that's it. So that speaks to where we are, in the sport, right? So
that's different. I don't think we've ever had a year that the batting title winner was under 300. I think one of the lowest was like Carl Yastrzemski won it one year at like
301 or something.
Yeah, something like that. Really low.
Marcell Ozuna was who I was, referencing, obviously. But it's different. That's one of the great things about why we love baseball. You don't know night to night what you're going to see. I'm going to walk over the ballpark here in Comerica in a little bit. You don't know what you're going to see. Look at Pavin Smith the other day. First 3 at bats, he goes 3-run homer, grand slam, solo homer. Right. So
and then gets an opportunity to come up with a runner on and score runner on base. He could have had a home run cycle. Could have had 4 home runs with a 2-run homer there. That was the last one he needed. It's wonderful. You're going to see an unassisted triple play today, Drew.
Is that what I'm going to say?
That's the thing.
I called Tulo's. Yeah. Tulo was trying to get like 4 outs, if you remember. He was tagging everybody. I was like, Tulo, you got enough guys. You're good. We're only playing 3 outs today.
That's it. He thought they were rollover minutes. They were rollover outs,
Yeah, he wanted to move one forward.
All right, Drew, go ahead and plug away. Let folks know about the podcast and everything else you're doing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Patrick. The Drew Goodman Podcast, catchy name, different. It typically launches every Thursday, and you could subscribe and we talk about, as you know, Patrick, because you are you've always been kind to me, you always listen, but we talk a lot about the Rockies naturally, but I have great interest in everything going on regionally and nationally. So there's plenty of football in there this time of year and other things that are topical. So we have fun, and I almost always have a guest. In fact, I think 99.9% of the time I have a guest that is featured each week, and we drop every Thursday, as I said, the Drew Goodman Podcast, and it's available as everyone says, wherever your favorite podcasts are located.
Highly recommend it. Great conversation on the one end, and on the start, great snapshot of what's going on, as you said, in the region, but an in-depth snapshot on all those things. So
yeah, I mean, I'll talk quite a bit about, CU CSU this week, which, and everything going on in Boulder. I mean, never a dull moment now in Boulder when it comes to Deion Sanders and that football program. And, the Broncos are underway, and Bo Nix has one game under his belt. So there's a whole lot going on this time of year. It's a fun time of year. And there'll be some postscript, I know, on your show, Patrick, and certainly on mine with this Rockies season and looking at, the bright spots and what kind of move they can make with this collective young talent in the most important area, and that's the one-loss column.
Yeah, big off season up ahead. Absolutely. Drew Goodman Podcast, check that out. You're already listening to the Rockies Insider. Make sure you're liking and subscribing to it, leaving a comment. That's always helpful. At Patrick D. Lyons, at Rockies_Insider. Drew, thank you for all of the momentum here on the pod, but as podcast people like myself prefer to say, your next show is only as good, or rather, your momentum is only as good as your next show. So I'll talk to you tomorrow.